This is wonderful. Well, for those of you who know, I'm technically challenged most of the time. And so if I have to click more than two buttons, I have a problem. So I'm glad to get in. And thank you very much, uh, Demeric, for introducing me. And I'm just delighted to know that so many of my friends and family are on this call. So, exploring our heritages is very important to all of us. And uh, it is a wonderful opportunity at this particular time for me to say thank you to the Canadian Automotive Museum for getting in touch with me and for wanting to add my grandfather as part of this amazing experience. There are so many wonderful things about my family, and to be able to speak about any one of you uh, is special to me. And so, we know that museums are very important. There are a myriad of reasons why we flock to museums to help us to grow. And it is to preserve our cultural heritage and open the door for dialogue and social awareness. It provides lifelong learning opportunities to help us to better understand each other. And we can learn and grow from the different perspectives from all our collective stories. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get to know each other. So, this is a little bit about my story, my family's story. As you know, I am Bernice Carnegie, and I am the daughter of Goldie and Nathan Redmon. I'm a shoot from the Redmon roots. And I feel like I belong to this family because we do have such a wonderful spread of relatives that go all across North America. So, Nathan and Goldie Redmon. Now, I know it's about Nathan, but it can't be about Nathan without Goldie, because without her, he could not have achieved what he did. So, Nathan originally was from Columbus, Missouri, born in the 1800s, 1882. Goldie was born in Chicago, Illinois. And again, she was born in the 80s. And this is why I say this story is full of courage and resilience, because their time in life was very different from what we're experiencing right now. There are some things that are definitely out of our control. And here are a few of them. This loaf of bread reminds me of what my family is really like. We're all different shades, toasted differently. But boy, do we have a wonderful group. And I lived the Black experience here in Canada from a biracial heritage and blended families. And as I studied our family, what I learned is that so many of our families took in other folks, foster kids, adopted kids, blended our families together so that we had a much richer family. And so it's up to us to love the skin we're in. We need to learn to embrace who we are, because sometimes we can't control everything that goes on in our life. But the one thing we can control is who we are and how we, as our own individuals, can move forward with our lives. So I saw this little chart on ancestral mathematics, and it kind of hit home for me. We all have two parents, but by the time we get down to our 12th generation, more than 4,000 people have been part of our DNA. And if you think for a moment what that means and how these stories interact with our thoughts and our feelings about the struggles that they had and the challenges and the traumas and the health issues and sadness and happiness and the, oh, great love stories and the expression of hope for the future. That is so important to everything that we do. And so we, all of us that are on this call today, have our own story. And it's up to us to figure out, how do those who came before us make a difference in our lives? Everyone just wants to belong. We just want to be part of the bigger world. We just want to know that we're accepted, that we fit in. And I thought this quote was pretty good. Belongingness is the human emotional need to be an accepted member of a group, whether it is family, friends, co-workers, or a sports team. Humans have an inherent desire to belong and be an important part of something greater than themselves. So I managed to find 2 pictures of my grandmother, Goldie, and my grandfather, Nathan, in their teenage years. And I can see why they're attracted. She was beautiful. And as you saw in the earlier picture, even though she was from a biracial family, her skin tone was white and she had blonde hair. Interestingly enough, my grandfather, Nathan, also was from a biracial family, and his skin tone turned out to be brown with Negroid features. But there was this something that attracted them. And in the end, they got married in 1909, ready to start their life, ready to go forward and make what they thought were their dreams that were going to come true. But if you Google what was going on in Chicago back in the early 1900s, life wasn't going to be that easy for them. Yes, it was okay for a white-skinned person and a black-skinned person to get married, but they didn't make it easy for you, that's for sure. And they didn't make it easy for my grandfather to find good work. He was a janitor, a hotel doorman, a gabbie, a chauffeur, and a porter. But they had bigger dreams. And so what happened is that they had to think about, what can I do about the circumstances that I'm in? So when you can't control what's happening, challenge yourself to control the way you respond to what's happening. That's where the power is. It's within you to make those choices and decisions. And so they decided to take that train ride to Toronto. He was a porter. One of his trips took him there. And the decision was, maybe we will have a better chance of just walking down the road without being harassed. Maybe we'll have a better chance of having a job that really works for us. And so off they came to Toronto in 1913. Well, in 1913, there were less than 1,000 people of black tone in Toronto. And they moved in to a fairly new apartment. It was at 91 Grange Avenue near Dundas and Spadina, for those of you who are in the city. And they really thought, okay, this is our chance to move forward with our life. Well, they were pretty progressive. My grandfather was used to driving those cars, And so he bought his first car in 1917. It was a Chalmers, and they kept the receipt, which you see on the screen, $200. Now that's a stock photo. That's not the actual car, but it's a stock photo of what the car might have looked like. And then a little later in 1917, he bought a Hudson, $500. Here's my grandfather standing in front of a Hudson. I'm not sure it's exactly the same one he bought back then, but I know he loved this car because it shows up in so many of the photos that we had. He was very proud and took care of his cars. Well, the next thing was, what am I going to do with my family? And so this home is still standing, and it was built in the early 1900s. It had no sewage, no electricity, no gas, no paved roads, no sidewalks, no phone or radio service. And the street name changed 3 times. It was a little home that my grandfather rebuilt. He actually made the blocks 3 at a time for this particular home. There they are, sandstone, and I can just imagine the pride that he had as he put this house together. This is the house now, in the present time, and they now have big homes that have been built beside it. Initially, they were just small little, 2-bedroom homes initially. And this is original furniture that was in the home. I had the privilege of taking on that furniture after my grandmother died in 1969. And I've enjoyed that furniture for over 50 years. Apparently, as a young baby, I lived with them for the first year, my family did, and I used to crawl under that china cabinet and buffet. So I know that there are other pieces of furniture out there that other family members are cherishing as well, because it was a pride in our family to maintain all of these things. So what happened with that wonderful house? Here is an article that came up by the Globe and Mail in Toronto in 1947. It reads, "Then there is Nathan Redmon, who came to Toronto from the United States in 1913. He took a job as a porter, but realized I had to have security for my family and education for my children. He saved his money 5 years and then bought a truck and started his own cartage business, which grew to a fleet of 9 trucks, one of the biggest in York Township. A member of the Truck Owners Association and the Motor League, Redmon says it was hard getting business at first. But after I was in, the color line disappeared." Here is another article that came out in the Chicago Defender in 1945. It said, "Former Chicagoan. Redmon, a former Chicagoan, has lived in Toronto 32 years, during which time he specialized in contract work and the hauling of building and construction material. He has seen residential sections of Toronto developed from dense forest to imposing costly home sites, and much of the hauling of material was done by his firm. Redmon also held contracts for buildings on the University of Toronto campus and now has in service 11 10-ton trucks, all especially built for heavy haulage. The father of 6 children, Redmon has retired, and his sons and son-in-law have taken over the business with the interest and enthusiasm of youth. His wife and former Goldie Bishop, the former Goldie Bishop of Chicago, is secretary of the firm. That, in short, is my grandfather and his resilience and his courage to say, this isn't where I'm going to stay in life. This is where I'm going to build in my life. So back then, they did have business meetings of the Black community. And my family ended up hanging on to all kinds of amazing materials. I have some of the, what do you call them, calendars and books that share all of the different Black entrepreneurs of the time. But this picture was taken in my grandfather's home. And I actually recognize on that left side wall a picture of my mother as a teenager. And I remember this furniture that was in his home. They hung on to everything. I have articles from 1909, and they preserved all of these materials. So some of the items from his business, here is a professional operator's license. And this is scanned in from an original from August the 12th, 1918, when he was 35 years of age. He hung on to a conditional sales agreement for one of the trucks. March 25th, he buys another truck. Purchase price, $1,600. That'll make you smile. Paid $10 cash with each company delivery. So one of the things that he did with this particular truck, he was working with another trucking company, and he had an agreement where with each delivery he made, he would pay down on this truck so that he could end up owning it. He eventually owned more than a dozen trucks in his fleet. He kept some of the permits, and you can see the price tag on those, $88, $80, $100. We wish our permits could be so cheap at this particular time. But these items were important to him. And after my family has kept them for 50, 60, 70 years, I could not let them go myself. And right now I am working with York University to have them take on some of the archival items from our family. This photo was specifically taken, or my grandfather had it specifically taken as a memento of recognizing what he had done. The photo was taken in 1937. He owned 2 properties side by side, and the trucks would drive in on the east side around a circle and out the other side. There was a bay of garages in the back, and so this was an operating organization from the 1920s to the 1950s. These are a little bit of a close-up of some of the trucks. And what was so amazing is that my grandfather was so talented that he converted a number of trucks, and he actually built the flatbeds in the back of the trucks to make them operable for what he needed to do. So I read in one of the notes, he had his Hudson car that he changed to a truck. He had a Fulton, a Ruggles, a Packard. And as you'll notice from the picture, the trucks are all a little bit different. And that's because he converted them from many different kinds or models of trucks. This is a closer view of one of them, and this is my Uncle John as a teenager at the truck. And this is the back. Now you'll remember that they didn't have paved roads at the time, and so the entry and exit into the property was muddy when it rained and a mess when it snowed. This is a picture of my Uncle Nathan by one of the vehicles, and you will see in the middle here there is actually a gas pump. So they had their own gas pump on the property. And you will see that the entry right here, that's where the men went in, and they would walk to the back through the kitchen, and at the back of the house, over here, there's this white back on the house. That's what they made into an office. This particular picture also shows a trailer. My grandfather made that trailer, and he just loved going up north fishing. He was in Parry Sound quite a bit, and Wasaga Beach, and I have lovely pictures of the family, and they were in their swimsuits and have their fishing poles, and it was quite an interesting time for our family, because many Black families did not have the same opportunities that our family ended up having because my grandparents were so resourceful. It became a family affair. Yes, all of the Redmon boys, Nathan, John, Freeman, they all worked for the company at one time or another, including my own father, Herb Carnegie, who as a teenager had worked with my grandfather before he actually ended up marrying one of the daughters, which was Audrey Redmon. And I have this lovely vision of my mother sharing a story with me about how she used to look out one of the windows in the at the side of the house to watch my father come and go as he was working, because she had an eye on him. And I know my grandfather knew that he was interested in my mother, so that was kind of an interesting time for them. But by the 1950s, my grandfather was getting older. It was time for him to be letting go, and so they all signed up. But in the end, it was my Uncle Freeman who took over the business and ran it for a couple of years. But again, I can't tell this story without my grandmother. She was the one with the business head. She was the one who had had business training. And so she ran the administrative part of the business. And she did it while raising 6 children. She was involved in the community. This is a picture from the AME Church in Toronto in 1917. A lot of the American Black folk would get together and celebrate at different times. She was one of the original Black Cross nurses in Toronto. So in her own right, she was resourceful. She played the piano, brought a piano with her from Chicago, and she taught piano lessons to the young people in the community. So I have to hand it to her, because I'm thinking, she was born at a time when she couldn't vote. They weren't allowed to, a lot of women were not allowed to own anything. And so her name never went on. Her name never went on Redmon College. It was just all the men. But she was the one who was the brains in the office. So congratulations to my unsung hero, Goldie Bishop Redmon. 6 children, they grew up. The business grew up, and so did the family. This is the 54th anniversary of my grandparents' wedding. Everybody was there. All the family came from near and far. Two of the family members lived in the U.S. That was Adele and Helen, my mother's sisters, and the rest stayed in Canada. And at times, they had an opportunity to get together and to share our lives. I know I had an opportunity to share lives, especially with my Aunt Adele's daughters, who would come up every summer to go to the exhibition. And we would pick up our Nielsen's chocolates and have an ice cream waffle as we walked around the exhibition. So the title on this particular slide is Born to Build. Born to Build because, yes, they had these wonderful trucks. And yes, they helped build the city. But my grandfather really ended up being a construction engineer for 5 of the family homes, his own. And the home that I lived in was also built by the family. This is John, Nathan, and Freeman, the sons of Nathan. And here is my family home that my grandfather and my uncles built. That's me standing on the road in the wintertime in front of this house. And this is what North York looked like back then, back in 1945, 1946. North York, Willowdale was country. Right now, that street is a main street that goes from Bayview to Yonge Street, the next street north of Malvasman Square. But at the time my grandfather Carnegie bought property on this street, they didn't even have numbers on the houses. So my home is still standing. My grandfather's home is still standing. If you go down to 122 Belgravia, you'll see it. If you go to 244 Empress, you'll still see this house amongst many of the other houses that have been torn down and other beautiful houses have been put up. My Uncle Nathan was extremely resourceful, and he ended up being an electrical engineer with Franti Packard, and he built the first backsplit home in North York, of course, with the help of the rest of the family and the boys. And my Uncle Freeman's house, it's still standing in Scarborough. He was industrious and hardworking, and he was the last of the group. It was amazing to have him to go to and chat with, as all of us did. But he built his own home as well. My Uncle John's home has now been removed, and I don't have pictures of it, but I'm hoping that eventually I will get a picture from the family. So it's so important that we pass on our stories to the next generation, because we don't live in a vacuum. We need people. We need to connect with people. We need to understand where the strength of our lives really comes. So it's important to pass on our stories. And I am so grateful to my father because he wrote a book. It was called A Fly in a Pail of Milk. And that's exactly how many of us who live the Black experience in the Toronto community and other communities felt. We felt like a fly in a pail of milk. I was the only Black student in my classes for the first 13 years of school until I went to college, as many of my cousins were as well. And my father wrote in his book his story And he included in his story his memories of my grandparents, Redmon and Carnegie. His story became history and now is shared all over. And in 2019, on the 100th anniversary of my father's birth, his book was republished. And I got to write a part 2 in it. And I also got to share my feelings about my family and what a wonderful place I have come from that's helped me go forward in my life. And that part of the book is called Lessons Passed On from Father and Daughter. And so for all the younger group that is here with us on this call, this is your opportunity to talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents, find out why and how they got to come to this wonderful country of Canada. But I'm very connected. I'm connected to the US as well. I'm connected to Jamaica. This is not the story for tonight, but I'm also connected to Jamaica. And so my grandparents, Redmon, they made that journey because they saw that they thought they could have a better opportunity. This is our way of saying thank you. And every day I get up feeling grateful that they took the steps to come here. On the 100th year, we had a reunion. And I love the smiles on these faces because this is my cousin, Marion Coleman, who now lives in New Jersey. And she was one of the cousins that used to come up every summer, and we used to have a great time together. She'd teach us all the latest dances from the US and bring her 45 records. I think she'd be smiling right now. But here we are at our 100-year reunion. And I have to hand it to my cousins because they all chipped in from each of the different families to make this a celebration that was memorable. And the one last member of the family from Goldie and Redmon of the children was Freeman, who is in the center. And it felt like a tribute to him. And we went up and we lit candles to recognize each of our family members who had passed on. But this photo does it for me because it reminds me of how much I appreciate my cousins for putting that together. And here we all are. Here we all are. We had a marvelous time. And we got to know each other in a way that we hadn't before because we didn't know each other. We hadn't met all our family members. And these are the shoots from the Redmon roots. So through the trials and tribulations of my grandfather, Nathan, I am proud to represent the family on this call. You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it. My grandparents took the responsibility to make changes in their life. And with it, they paved the way for us. They clearly made a difference. And so I'm so proud to be on this call and to thank the Canadian Automotive Museum for seeing the value in what my grandparents did, in how they did it, and that their story is going to continue in the museum for many generations of young people to learn that it takes all different kinds of people. We're not supposed to look alike. We're not supposed to think alike. We are supposed to be different. And we are supposed to bring those differences together so that we can embrace each other's lives. So, with that, I thank you. It's been a pleasure to share this.
That was wonderful, Bernice. Thanks so much. If anybody has questions or comments, now's the time to type them in the Q&A. But I'll get started. Trucking and haulage at this time in Canada was really, from what we know of the time, pretty dangerous and often quite the adventure. Especially, do we know, did Nathan Redmon do much trucking out of the Toronto area? Was he going city to city at all?
I'm not aware that he was. I did have another uncle in the other family, Carnegie family, that did was in trucking. He didn't own his own trucking business, but he had his own truck, and he used to cross the border. And yes, it was dangerous. It was dangerous for him. I learned that there were some incidences that really were hurtful and harmful to him. But I believe my grandfather's business was basically in the Toronto area, and that he really was responsible for helping the many builders in the city to, as one of the articles said, it talked about him hauling in items for the University of Toronto. So that wasn't the only major building that he worked with.
Now, we've seen he collected quite an impressive, I guess, archive of documents. But one thing I'm wondering, do we have any of Goldie and Nathan's story in their own words?
Um, no. But one of the things that I have added to the family website, and the family website is bernicecarnegie.com. I added a new journal for my family, and it is a journal of the Redmon roots and those family members born in the 1800s. So it now contains information about their parents and their siblings, and they kept letters, they kept artifacts, all kinds of pictures, and I have put them in the book. I am holding on to artifacts right now from 1870, from a great grandfather on my grandmother's side. So some of those stories are in this new journal. So I sending out a love invitation to my family to go into bernicecarnegie.com, tab on Family Roots Redmon, and you will see there's a new button to push, and it's family members from the 1800s. Just added it today.
Right. I see a couple people have their hands up. This particular Zoom format isn't actually set up for other people to be able to speak, but if you've got questions, please type them in the Q&A and we will get to them. I wanted to ask, because you mentioned that Nathan was a taxi driver before he came to Canada, and that's really early in the history of the idea of taxi driving. Did he ever have any stories about his youth as a driver?
Unfortunately, I have to say that I got involved in putting the family stories together too late to ask the questions I should have been asking. I did have the privilege of spending more time with my grandmother, Goldie. She eventually lived in a home about 5 blocks from my parents' home in North York, she and my grandfather, after they gave up the business. And I used to go up and help her by cleaning her home and brushing her hair and doing all kinds of wonderful things, where she would tell me little, I call them legacy notes, I guess, in my journal, where she told me little things about things that happened in the family, just in our little conversations together. But the questions you're asking me about the actual trucks, I wish I knew more about them. I only have the paperwork that he saved, and so that's what I have put up on the site.
Remy was is actually specifically asking what makes of truck did Redmond Haulage own? And I know we've seen Ruggles and Mack and White. It's an amazing cross section of just about every kind of truck you could get at the time.
Yes, and when you do a zoom in on the trucks across the special picture that he had taken, you can see all the trucks are different makes, and he retrofitted them all. He was the one that put the backs on them to make sure that they would work for what he was doing. The interesting thing about it is that my father, although he was an athlete, in his off season, once he had been married, he would go back and work for my grandfather. And that was his way of staying in condition, because they didn't have the kind of gyms that they have now that you can keep conditioning as an athlete. So the lifting of bricks and blocks and whatnot kept him in condition.
Angelique is asking, is Redmond Haulage and Trucking still around?
No, that ended in 1954. And but you know what? It was definitely a solid company, because it ran for more than 30 years.
Absolutely. The Great Depression was a hard time for anything automotive related. I mean, a huge swath of the Canadian industry and all the Canadian secondary industries essentially disappeared almost overnight. So it's a tribute to Nathan and Goldie that they stuck through the Great Depression and were able to maintain a successful business. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I never actually heard them say that I didn't hear them speak about that time and that they had any difficulties. But as I said, this is why it's so important for our young people right now to be asking questions of their parents and their grandparents, and to be recording the information, because the stories get lost if you don't do it.
I remember when I was doing the research for the biographical exhibit, you, I think, mentioned an incident where they had to pawn their wedding rings for capital.
Yes, yes. My grandmother, that is in the journal. My grandmother did have to give up her wedding rings a couple of times in order to make things happen. So maybe, yeah, there is a story there, but they did what they had to do. You know what? I mean, we are spoiled in this generation, where we move into homes that are already looking like homes and gardens and whatnot. And back then, they were moving into a home they were building, and all of our family did exactly that. They moved into unfinished homes and they built them while they were in them.
Yeah, I struggle to imagine a situation where you'd move into a house with its own gas pump. That is an impressive bit of home improvement, if ever there was one.
Well, I got an email from a gentleman who lived on Belgravia, when my grandmother and her family were younger, and he contacted me a year ago, I believe it was, and he made this comment which made me smile. He said, "We thought they were the richest people on the street. They were the only ones that owned a business, because it was small, kind of like wartime houses that were on the street." And my grandfather rebuilt a little house and put a second story on it and added to the back, and added an office in the back. And yes, it was quite impressive for its time.
Ingrid's wondering about do we know anything about this? This is a question I don't know much of the answer to myself. The cost of starting a business back then and how easy it was for them to get things like business loans. Do we have anything like that in the family documents?
I don't know about the business loans. I know that I have the actual mortgage document of the house for the first owner before my grandfather took it over, and it was for $365. Um, the the documents for the permits seem to be quite low, and the cost of I don't know whether there was a cost, what kind of a cost there was for actually starting the business, but I'm assuming it couldn't have been that large because the cost of the trucks were of course, in that time, it would have been like a lot of money, right?
On a related note, actually, Lindsay's asking if you would have any advice based on Nathan and Goldie's story for young people today who want to start their own business.
Yes. My advice is don't let anybody tell you you can't do it. You know, it's very interesting when people have a dream and they want to move forward with their life and do something special, and other people tell them they can't do it, or throw a bunch of roadblocks in front of them. The thing that I recognize and I appreciate about my grandparents is that they had a myriad of roadblocks. It wasn't just general life, it was who they were. And the fact that a white skinned woman and a black skinned man weren't even supposed to be together, but they made it work. And they went through the issues of segregation, of I don't want to get political on all of this, but you know, life is not a straight road. Life is meant to challenge us. Life is meant to help us, to test us, to see what we're made of. And so when you want to start your own business, you have to have the kind of personality that says, I'm going to try to see this through. I'm going to get the information that I need to make it work, to help me make it work. But in the end, it's usually up to the individual to have the determination and perseverance to follow through. And that's what life seems to take at any time. And so I'd say, don't give up. If that was one thing about our family, we were not a family that gave up. We were a family that kept trucking through it.
Absolutely. Another thing that got brought up in our research was that he was an early member of the Ontario Motor League. And for those who don't know, the Ontario Motor League is one of the precursor organizations of what is now the CAA. It became CAA Southeast Ontario, I believe, sometime in the 1950s. And you talked a fair bit about Nathan in the context of Black business organizations, but do we know about his relations and how well he fit in or didn't fit in, as the case may be, with what was sort of a entirely sort of upper middle class white motoring community at the time?
Well, as one of the articles pointed out, his comment was, it was difficult at first, but once I'd made the breakthrough, the colored line disappeared. And so I think part of it was his confidence in himself, but there were other Black businessmen that eventually they formed an organization. There was a gathering place on Bathurst, where they would have dances and things to bring the children together, because we were so scattered. There were so few of us, and we just didn't get to see each other all the time. And so it was up to our parents and our grandparents to help us get together and to meet other people in the community that looked like us. But for many of us, that didn't happen very often. But being down closer to the city, because my grandfather was near Eglinton Avenue and kind of the Dufferin area, and so he wasn't right downtown, but he was closer to getting down there, and made friends. And his business was white people. The men that worked for him were basically white people, because there just weren't enough Black people in the community that to count on to do that. So he had to learn to be personable and to understand the community and to have the community accept him. But here's the thing. Canada was not without its issues. And when they first came, and my grandmother was working for another company, and he would drive her to work, but he would leave her off about a block away from work so they wouldn't see him, because for them, she was white and he was Black. And from a business standpoint, sometimes it didn't work. But somehow he got through it from the trucking end of things. But it was perseverance.
Absolutely. Well, we're almost at 8 o'clock. If anybody has any final questions for the Q&A, we've gotten a load of really positive comments. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. But Bernice, I want to ask you: did you have any final thoughts? Any things about Nathan and Goldie's story you wish you knew more about? You know, if you had a time machine, what would you ask them?
Well, I would like to know more about their life when they were in the United States. Um, I know that it was very difficult, but from some of the pictures that I've seen, my grandmother um, worked in a white community, but she socialized in the Black community. So I see pictures of her socializing with the Black community. But it was something she had to do in order to exist at the time, because segregation was a reality at that time, and they just really made it difficult for families of color to function. And so I would have liked to know more about what she was thinking and what gave her the strength to work so hard at school. Her grades were in the 80s and 90s. I do have some of her school records. I have her school records. And so I would like to know what she was thinking and what he was thinking at the time, and how they actually met. So the one thing I don't know is, how did they meet, right? And what that looked like. So I only could say, as I said earlier in the presentation, I'm very grateful that they chose to come here, because of their resilience and their efforts. If I know my life is better, I know my life is better, but I know they had to do a lot of what they had to do on their own and not give up on life. And so that's one thing that I would say to all of our young people out there. If you give up, you're giving up on yourself. Don't do that. Stay in the game of life.